Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody to our Solve module of our Lead and Achieve Complex Change Experience. I'm actually going to do what's in our first step of our process, our welcome and check-in, but I'm going to do it in reverse order of what's listed. So let's go ahead and start with step 2, and then we'll come back to step 1. So we're going to check in. We have 2 check-in questions this morning, which is how are you arriving and what's a curiosity you bring about today's session? Who would like to start? Hi, Sarah.
I'll go.
Great.
Okay, so I'm trying to be work more on the process of my meetings. So instead of, well, I still focused on the homework, but I also focused on kicking the girls, my daughters, out of the kitchen so I have a quiet area, and using headphones instead of just the computer speakers so I can be more present.
Great. Thanks, Claudette. And what's a curiosity you bring about today's session?
I'm curious about this, the question we had to come up with.
Okay.
What we're going to do with that.
What you're going to do with it. Cool. Yeah. It's going to be fun. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for making some modifications at home that allow you to be more present. I know that's a lot. Thanks. Who would like to go next?
We're all unmuted, right? So
yeah.
I can go next. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see your faces. I'm arriving today with, I'm still feeling a little bit scattered, but that's the usual, right? And I'm curious about leveraging collective wisdom for decision-making in our meeting designs.
Great. Thanks, Susanna. We noticed that you and Cody had questions around that. So we look forward to beginning to talk about that. Thanks for being here. Sarah, how about you?
Sure. I'm arriving well. I had a meeting with Joanne and Claudette early this morning, and I've been going since kind of early, so I feel like my energy level is dropping, but I'm hoping to rev it back up for you guys. But otherwise, I feel good, and curiosity for today, definitely also curious about what problems people bring to this session and just kind of see where that takes us. Should be interesting.
Yeah. Welcome, Sarah. But may the container of this group buoy your energy. Just bring what you have. It's all good. We're glad you're here.
Yeah.
Cody.
I'm arriving. Well, you said you want to switch. So what I'm curious about is how to apply this methodology both to work and personal life, and how that might be able to, you know, lessen up some anxieties that I have. And then I'm arriving, well, I just had a meeting with Shannon, and I always feel very clear after those meetings on what is next and what I need to do. So that is a nice breath of fresh air for my week.
Thanks, Cody. Appreciate that. Glad you're here. Joanne, you want to check in?
I would like to check in. I'm arriving, so I had back-to-back meetings, one with Sarah and Claudette and another one with a client. And the theme of the day is benevolence and compassion. And it was funny, in the second meeting that I had, it was about a particularly contentious meeting that happened with a lawyer and our regional transit authority. And I was a fly on the wall in this meeting, and I was talking to my client about how that benevolence is actually what was missing in the meeting, and how everything could have been better. Like, everybody was competent, everyone was predictable, right? But what was really missing was this benevolence piece, and I was reflecting back to her how we might bring in more benevolence in our high stakes conversations that have to do with regional development in Atlanta. And so it's just kind of nice to have that kind of theme go throughout. And a curiosity that I'm bringing into today's session is I'm hopeful, well, I'm curious whether or not At the end of this session, you will now have some strategies to untangle the balls of yarn that we carry around, the tangled balls of yarn that we carry around in our heads. So I'm curious if that's going to happen. I'm complete.
Great. Thanks. Welcome. And I'll check in and say that I'm arriving, really looking forward to this particular session. Joanne and I had the opportunity to do a version of this workshop with a different client last week. A client that I work with at the state of Idaho, and because of the current COVID life, we delivered it together, which is unusual, and it was totally enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to repeating that experience with the 4 of you. And a curiosity that I'm bringing is similar to Joanne's, hopeful that you'll leave the session feeling that you have some new skills for untangling what can be sort of gnarly problems that show up in our personal and our work lives. So with that, Joanne, will you go ahead and share slides, and then we'll review the meeting plan. Great. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So before we review the meeting plan, I want to just set a little bit of context about where we are in our overall journey together. So we are officially midway. Solve is the 3rd module of the 4 and the middle session for us, since we'll have a wrap-up session in June. You know, we start with trust because it's an essential ingredient in effective relationships, and it's a precondition for change. And I appreciate, Joanne, your reminder this morning about the power and the need for benevolence. And then we move to meetings because they're the fundamental organizing unit of our work lives. And when they're facilitated in the way that we've discussed, they are essentially problem solving that's bound in time and space. From meetings, we then move into to solve and strategic and organizational problem solving. And many of the skills that we learned in meetings, such as articulating a strategic intent and intended outcomes, you'll find re-emerging in our session today. And it's really why we teach them in this order, that meetings are problem solving bounded in the context of a meeting. And then we move to change scoping or problem solving, which is essentially unbounded, so to speak. So that's the progression and where we are. So with that, I want to welcome all of us again to our call this morning. And Joanne, let's move to our 12:10 slot of reviewing today's meeting plan.
Let's do that. All right, so we're going to review today's meeting plan. Would someone care to read out loud the context for today?
This is Suzanne, I can read it. Context for today's Solve workshop. In our daily work and lives, we engage in many types of change, projects, initiatives, and actions. Sometimes we initiate the change or action. Sometimes we ask for, sometimes we are asked or assigned to develop the initiative. At other times, we are asked or assigned to implement the project. How often do we find ourselves at the start of a new project or initiative with no clear idea of the real change we are seeking and/or no clear idea of how best to proceed? Why is this a problem worth solving? What do we need to do? What do we need to do first? And where should we begin?
Thanks, Suzanne. So that's the table for why we're here. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this context? All right. In that case, I'm just going to go ahead and hit this and bump it down to the next page. Would somebody else care to, do that. Oh, I see what I was doing. Try this way. Someone else care to read our intent and intended outcomes for today?
I can. So intent for today, to introduce how the scope method can help us create more strategic and sustainable change. Intended outcomes, number 1, increased awareness of why change making in today's world is particularly challenging. 2, an increased understanding of how the 5 phases of the scope method are critical to any change effort. 3, an increased awareness of why defining the situation is an essential first step to engaging in effective change scoping. 4, an experience of scope to identify and articulate a real change and its accompanying intended outcomes. 5, increased ability to facilitate yourself and others to define the situation, change, and intended outcomes. 6, increased understanding, connecting intended outcomes to the change we seek. 7, increased understanding of how to operationalize our intended outcomes into a plan. And 8, increased bravery and enthusiasm for practicing this powerful approach to change scoping.
Thank you, Cody. Any questions or comments about our intent or what we intend to accomplish as a result of this workshop? If there are none, would some brave soul offer to review our agenda beginning at the 12:15 item and just reviewing the when and what columns?
I can do that.
Thank you.
So 12:15 questions, 12:25 change and intro, 12:45 scope how to part 1 or how part 1, 12:55 change scoping, 1:10 scope how part 2, 1:20 break, 1:30 scope practice the situation, 2:05 scope practice the change, 2:30 scope outcomes, 2:50 next steps, and 2:55 check out, 3 p.m. adjourn.
Awesome. Thank you, Colette. Any questions or comments about our roadmap for today? If there are none, then I will pass the talking stick to, myself.
Yeah.
Okay, the next section. This is a nice thing about the meeting plan. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so just answering some final questions on that buddy meeting. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to take a look. Cody and Suzanne brought a bunch of questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about, spend a little bit of time on that. And then actually most of it is we're going to devise a plan for how to get you the answers on the questions we can't get to. And just provide you with some final thoughts about meeting or facilitation. And then the third thing is, and I'll just go ahead and just show this right now. There's a handout that I want you guys to have that I wrote. I showed this to Claudette and Sarah this morning. Did either of you get a chance to pop it open? Yeah? Did it seem useful? Did it seem to point you? Yeah, okay. So this is a relatively new piece of curriculum. I actually wrote it for one of Sarah and Claudette's colleagues. But it essentially helps you navigate, which I think is one of the questions. How do you actually navigate introducing the meeting design for the first time, especially to people who have no idea what you've just put in front of them? So that is a resource that you can take with you. All right, so with that, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the time. So the questions that Suzanne and Cody brought, I'm just going to go ahead and blow this up. Essentially, there are kind of two buckets of questions. One of them having to do with, so there's sort of facilitation-oriented questions, and I'm going to just bump this one up over here. And then there is sort of a second bucket of questions on decision-making. Let me just address the second bucket first. Shannon and I were just talking about this at the top of the hour. We have, we were not originally going to present some our methodology on decision-making, but given I think it's a really important thing that we want to talk about. And we're actually going to carve out some time on our last session to talk about decision-making and decision-making rules. And so we're going to flesh that part out specifically in addressing some of these questions. But I'm curious from Suzanne and Cody, do you guys have a particular urgent need in which you're going to need some just-in-time coaching around because you got some stuff you got to actually get done? Yes. Suzanne, you want to take yourself off mute and give us a little bit of table setting around that? Like what's going on in your world?
Yeah, so I guess this pertains to, I guess, two sort of different veins. One is that I've got sort of like a coalition of partner organizations that's been formally meeting over the past 6 to 7 months. And it's clear that they want to have a collective action or project to work on together. And it's kind of hoping to rally them to make a decision around on what that project could be. We've kind of thrown out a bunch of hypotheticals. And then the second sort of vein is that what I see in the communities that I work with, there's coalitions of sort of private and public stakeholders coming together, and some of the skills for them to make decisions as well. A lot of times is, is it going to be consensus based? And some of them will basically create bylaws to make decisions that they can all agree on, which is very formal and time consuming. You can spend a whole year ironing out bylaws. So I just want to give them some other options besides creating a lot of paperwork to make a decision.
Okay. So just like how I met with Sarah and Claudette this morning on sort of a situation that they're dealing with Thea, what I'm going to propose, and just to be transparent with the group, is that Shannon or I will meet, we'll come up with a plan and connect with the two of you in particular to address any immediate needs that you have, and we'll figure out whether meeting with the both of you would be helpful so that Cody can get some shadowing in, or whether Suzanne, there's some specifics. So we'll figure out a plan after this.
Okay.
But I wanted everybody to sort of see these questions because I think this is going to be part of the framing of some of the stuff we're gonna bring back in. So that's how we're gonna address this situation. So as pertaining to the rest of the facilitation questions, I want to invite Sarah, Suzanne, and Sarah to maybe tackle some of the, because I think we touched upon some of this. And I'm particularly interested in question number 4. I'm going to put one or both of you on the hot seat. Anybody want to provide some reflections on what we might have talked about this morning?
You mean Sarah and Claudette, John?
Claudette, yes, sorry.
Okay. I mean, do you want to start with 4 or do you want to start with 1? Where should we begin?
Let's start with 4 because I remember that was something talked about.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about, like, I mean, specifically, I think what we said is like whether or not addressing a specific challenge was above our pay grade or not. And I think that there are a couple things here. So one, yes, you need to decide whether or not, because these are 2 questions in my mind. If you are not the right person to have that meeting or have that discussion, then we should identify who is. But if you're in a meeting and you're having to wear both hats of facilitator, participant, you just need to be explicit about it. Like, right now I have my facilitator hat on and this is what I'm doing. I'm directing, guiding this conversation. I'm taking it off, and as the subject matter expert or the participant, this is my advice or input or what I feel about blah, blah, blah. You just have to let people know what you're doing one way or the other. But in terms of, like, if you're not the right person to facilitate, if you think that you're, I don't know, for whatever reason, I think you just need to have that conversation up front and decide who should be the facilitator.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Cody and Suzanne, where did the first, give us a little bit of commentary on where that first half of that question.
So the first one, I think this goes into, from my experience, the external meetings where no one else is trained. Again, it's a coalition dynamic. And you may be kind of the de facto chairperson who is doing a lot of the gathering and has information that not everyone has. So you're playing you inevitably end up playing multiple roles. Like an ideal situation, you have somebody that's recording and helping you and this, with the design and the agenda. But I find it really hard in the external meetings where you have just multiple roles that you're playing, and you can be explicit, but like it ends up being really stressful. And it's hard, again, if those external people don't have the skills or understand the importance of the meeting design.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Suzanne? Is it possible for you to reach out to one or two members ahead of time and say, hey, we've got a big meeting coming up. Could you help me with keeping time and making sure we're on schedule, or help me by taking notes while I'm talking, so because I won't be able to do both. We do that at the beginning of our meetings, but everybody is, on the same page about the meeting design process. But it might be beneficial to reach out like a couple of days ahead of the meeting and say, just ping a couple of people that you feel would be engaged, even if they don't know what the actual process is and haven't been trained.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I've been trying to assign people, but again, I think it's some of them not taking, like being a great recorder, a great timekeeper, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
I've also had people, I guess this is a point maybe we made earlier, where we're in meetings like this and they're like, oh, I love this. This is so well thought out. I'm not going to follow this, and kind of derail your agenda. They're like, I love it, but we don't need this, and totally reject it. So I'm just curious about, it's just tough. I think what I find myself in a position is that it's kind of like being a teacher where everyone is looking at you, and, just kind of keeping folks active and engaged, but also not being an enabler of like their passivity, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I would just ask them, like, what do you want to get out? I mean, you don't have to ask them in this language so that it's not like, so that's not a barrier to them. So you don't want to like, let's provide some context and some intended outcomes. And then they just like switch off because they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But maybe at the next convening, just say, what do you guys want to get out of this? What are our goals as a group? And have them sort of ideate around that and really listen to it, and then try to pull them together to agree at the end and say, okay, what I'm hearing is we want to do these three things, A, B, and C. Does everybody agree on that? Does anybody not agree on that? Like, I had to do that a bit with one of our teams when I joined SIA. They had done a whole context and like scoping process for the team, but like the general sense was that nobody was really aligned with it, and they didn't really know what their purpose was as a team. So we literally spent probably 2 months, and there being like 4 to 5 meetings, just going through each step by step and saying, okay, what are our intended outcomes? What purpose should we serve? And just being really slow and methodical about it. And you may not have the luxury of that much time, but anything you can do towards that will get people to feel like they have a lot of ownership over what they're doing. They defined it. So just keep reminding them, this is what you guys said you wanted. So this is what we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great idea. Like using the design as a way to also kind of align them around their mission and goals too. I like that.
Yeah. So the Facilitation 101 document, I'll hang on a second, Shannon. The Facilitation 101 document will really help you normalize that. And so we actually talked about like, how do you actually, when you put a document like this in front of people, they don't know how to navigate, right? So the Facilitation 101 document really kind of walks you through that initially enrolling and onboarding folks into thinking this way. Shan, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was also thinking that I would right size the level of structure for the group, right? So for a group that resists process, I wouldn't design a meeting that has tons of process. I might even just have intended outcomes on the paper, but have a process in your mind for how you're going to get them through each of the intended outcomes as you facilitate, so that it feels less onerous to them. And you're still getting you're getting them where you need them to go, but you're meeting them where they are in terms of their appetite for the meeting design. And then the other thing I would say, Suzanne, is that, and this depends on the audience, right? And it depends on your comfort level. So it's not a one size fits all response. But sometimes a little bit of hierarchical authority or a little bit of authority helps create collaboration. So you might need to facilitate with a little bit of a stronger approach in order to keep the people who are derailing the meeting or derailing the process from continuing to do that.
Yeah. And the thing I was telling Claudette and Sarah this morning is you're always doing it in service of the meeting being successful, right? In service of the group. So when you kind of frame it that way, then it takes the sort of compelling control and, oh my God, they're screwing up my meeting. Like it sort of takes you out of that sort of ego defended way and more in service. But Shannon is absolutely right. There are many, many ways in which what you want to do is you do want to just meet them where they are, right? And if this is too scary for them initially, like we said, just use different parts of it. But intended outcomes are always great. Intent and intended outcomes, a little bit of context, take the stuff out of the table, make the process, anything that makes it palatable to them. It's like getting kids to eat broccoli, right? It's just a little bit at a time, and then you can give them more and more and more. So it takes a couple iterations and training. But the internal document you have in your head, like that will save you because it'll keep you sane, right? And keep you from track of where you are in the process.
Okay, that makes sense. That's basically like when I do community events, I have like a really short agenda and then I have my annotated agenda. It's very different. Yeah.
We did that a little bit at GO when we were kind of doing our thing too, right, for the conference. I wish we had another hour to talk about this because this is like some of this stuff that Shannon and I just love to talk about. So we hope that these conversations will continue going. And Suzanne, yeah, there are specific things. Just reach out. We can. There's lots we can say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, I would say we'll make sure we have a specific follow-up conversation, Suzanne, with you. And then I'm wondering about maybe we hold on to some of these questions, Joanne, and we continue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're over time, but we have other questions that we want to make sure that we at some point find time to respond to.
Yeah. No, I think this would be a good one to make because we're going to talk about this today, right? And then we're going to talk about decision making. So we'll hit all these things.
Okay.
Anyone feeling incomplete before we move to the next section of our meeting? Opt out.
I was gonna say one thing. This morning you touched on benevolence a lot, and yeah, I had a whole bunch to say about that one because I was talking to our policy associate, and we have something that we needed feedback on by yesterday, and we pushed it back to Friday. And she's like stressed out about getting it by Friday. And my knee-jerk reaction was, well, that's not fair to you. And so you need to stress to them that it has to be in by Friday. And then I went back to our conversation this morning about benevolence, being kind to ourselves and being kind to others. And I said, and we talked about like, we're in this together, this is a project for all of us to succeed. So maybe ask them, what do you need from me in order to get it in by Friday at 5?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Claudette. A little course correction right there. attitude correction.
Course correction, that's awesome.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. All right, in that case, I will turn things over to Shan to take us into
all right, so we're at our 12:25 slot, just a little bit late, but we're going to start our conversation on change and on problems, and we want to do that to start with a silent reflection. So the 2 prompts, which are also in your meeting design, 2 questions. These should the structure of these should feel familiar. What are 2 things you found hard or frustrating when creating change or solving problems in groups? So thinking about others, right? When you're doing that with others. And then the second question is, what's one thing that's hard for you personally when creating change or problem solving? So thinking about self. So I'm going to give us a minute or 2 to do a quick silent reflection, and then we'll share in a round of counsel. Okay. Who would like to start? Joanne's going to record, and we're just going to capture your responses on the slide and move through the group. Who would like to start?
I can start.
Thanks, Betty.
So for others, things that I find hard and frustrating is that the group is disorganized in their thoughts, and there's a lot of competing interests.
Great.
And then for myself, when trying to solve a problem, I feel like I don't trust what my brain naturally comes to, so I'm always seeking outside counsel, or like I want other people to weigh in on a problem before even if it's the same solution that I came up with. I just don't trust it.
Okay, great, thanks. What's next?
This is Suzanne. For others, I had expectations, or I guess setting expectations, uncertainty, or uncertainty / I have ownership, uncertainty of ownership, like who's leading or implementing change, or.
Oh, got it. Okay. And can you say a little bit more about the setting expectations, Suzanne? What about the setting expectations is frustrating or hard?
Well, I think we all come in with assumptions, particularly with like problems or for, overhauling a system. And so I guess it's assumptions / expectations that we're all walking in with and being able to lay those to bear,
Yes.
The assumptions about the nature of the problem or the nature of the solution?
It can sometimes be both. I feel like, I guess it just depends. I guess in this one, I'm trying to think what's an articulate way to say this. I'm sorry. I think for expectations, it kind of goes into that uncertainty and implementing change. And then on the assumptions part, I think it can be roles. It can also be, like the intended outcomes that each group wants to achieve. They can be different, but there can be like that universal one, right? And sort of how they're being prioritized or.
Yep. Yeah, got it. Yeah, there's a lot of clarity that can help, right? That we don't always naturally create. Great, thank you. How about for yourself?
For self, I think it's to kind of echo Cody, there's the doubt is a big issue. And then for me, I think there's the time management of kind of over researching, like what the best sort of like solution might be, and driving myself crazy with that.
Okay, cool, thank you. Sarah, how about you?
Sure. So two things that are hard for me to deal with in other people are just like a stubbornness and unwillingness to change.
Okay.
And people are just real stuck in their viewpoint. They don't care what other people's perspective is. Yep. And then kind of along that same line, a lack of listening, like when you're trying to problem solve with somebody and they're just waiting for their turn to talk, and it's a non-starter.
Great.
For myself, I will also just say stubbornness and unwillingness to change is probably also a challenge that I have.
Turning the lens on ourselves.
Yes, we all think we're very right. Nobody thinks they're a bad driver.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. Claudette?
I'm trying to see if, I guess calming, if people have anxiety about the unknown, calming anxieties.
Yeah.
And, I echo everything others have said.
Great.
For others.
And then how about for yourself, Claudette? What's challenging for you personally, problem solving?
I think my anxiety usually comes around, is centered on jumping to solutions before identifying the actual problem.
Great. Awesome. Give Joanne just a second to catch up.
I'll fix the typing.
Okay.
Are you
So
done?
this is a supernatural list of things we find hard about problem solving and change. And we're going to now move into how can we lead problem solving and change in such a way that we can alleviate some of these challenges. So I need to scooch the Zoom over. So give me just a sec to arrange my screen. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we're talking about change and problems, and we want to talk about the relationship between those two things. Next slide, please. All right, so as with other parts of Strelo, we also have a definition for problems. And our problem definition, or definition of a problem, is any situation you want to change in a meaningful way. So when we solve a problem, we are creating change and a new end state emerges. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we've noticed, and I will be fully transparent and say that I was for quite a while a person in this category, is that sometimes people have a problem with the word problem. We don't like it. We think it sounds negative. We wish that we would call it an opportunity or a challenge. But from a Strelo perspective, we see the word problem differently. And I want to share with you what that is or why that is. Next slide. So here are some of our beliefs about the word problem. The first is that problems are, from our perspective, they're compelling, right? They're not negative. And the second piece of this is that humans can be superb at problem solving. It is one of our defining characteristics in terms of what makes us human. We're not always superb at problem solving, as you guys have identified, but we can be, and we believe we can be when we use a more structured approach to problem solving. The third thing about our beliefs and the word problem is that solving problems is what leaders do. And I think this is applicable whether or not we are a leader in terms of our positional power or we're a leader in the role that we play. But leadership is about creating change. Like, we're not here, from my perspective as leaders, to maintain the status quo. We're here to make things better or different at varying scales and degrees. And that means we're here to solve problems, and we're here to lead change. And the fourth thing that we believe is that the word problem invites inquiry, and it indicates that there is something worth solving, that there's something worth spending our time as leaders tackling. Next slide. So this slide is intended to describe the business as usual phases of solving problems, and you've express some of the frustrations of this particular way of solving problems. So it starts with a trigger. We're informed or we become aware that something needs to be done. And often in our organizations, that feels like pressure. It feels like stress. There's an incredible sense of urgency. We might feel that ourselves, or somebody else might be telling us that there's now an emergency that we're responding to. So we're responding to somebody else's sense of urgency. And as an organizational culture in the United States, we are biased towards action. So we are quickly expected to move to solution. We implement something, we feel really good about the fact that we've done something, and then we wait to see what the results might be. Next slide. The problem with solving problems in the usual way is that commonly what we see is that the solution that we implemented didn't solve the problem. Perhaps the solution even caused a different problem. The solution that we implemented isn't sustainable, and we'll talk about this when we talk about change scoping, about why that is, and often it likely resurfaces. Or we might find that the solution never got implemented to begin with. So this is, I'm suspecting that these are things you've experienced in your own organizations or work life. Next slide, please. And when that happens, right, when we're in the problem solving as usual approach, what happens is this, right? We do a wash, a rinse, and a repeat. So we're back at having a trigger. We find ourselves solving another problem. We're responding to stress and urgency. We implement something, but we're not sure whether or not we've actually solved the problem or created the change that we intended to create. And the result of this is that it wastes time. It wastes money, it wastes resources, and often it degrades our commitment as a team. It has a negative impact on engagement, right? It can be experienced as change fatigue in an organization, and our goodwill towards continuing to engage in problem solving and creating positive change decreases significantly. So we're losing our potential as humans to be fantastic problem solvers in the context of our organizations. Next slide. So this is a quote that we think came from Albert Einstein, but if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. So to your point, Claudette, it does pay off to spend more time in understanding the problem before jumping to solution. Next slide. So we're going to be presenting today a different way of engaging in change scoping and problem solving, and we call it scope. And I know that some of you have experienced this. Cody's recently gotten a taste of it, and I know that Sia has as well. Scope has 5 phases, and they correspond to the 5 parts of any problem solving effort. So the first is S for situation, C is for change, O is for outcomes, P is for plan, and E is for engagement. Scope is making what is usually an implicit or invisible process explicit for the group. So Suzanne, like many of the frustrations that you expect with a group, we come in with assumptions, we come in with uncertainty. Those assumptions and uncertainties are coming from what we're all carrying that's implicit about our expectations for the work or our belief about the problem. So scope is making all parts of the problem solving effort explicit, which means that as a group, we can stay together in the problem solving, we can stay together as we're solving problems, which makes us more likely in actually identifying the real change and implementing a change that is creating sustainable outcomes. Another point that I want to make about scope is that it's infinitely scalable. So it can be applied to any size of project, and we're going to show you some examples of that later in our conversation. That can be from solving a problem with one person to solving a problem with a team or solving a problem on behalf of an organization. The second thing I want to say is that even though we're going to teach you scope like it's linear, in the real world problem solving is circular. You can start anywhere in this process that you need to, but for the purpose of learning, we start with situation and we move our way around the circle and teach it to you linearly. I can say that. Next slide. Okay, so let's take a closer look at each of the phases of scope. The first is situation. So this is really understanding the situation in context to see and define a change much more clearly. And when we dive into situation further in our conversation, this is where we really start to talk about perspective taking and how do we look at the situation from many different people's lens or those who are relevant to this particular change we're trying to create. C stands for change, understanding the change that you want to make, including why it matters. So we're going to get some good practice about really articulating clear and crisp problem and intent statements. A really good problem and intent statement has the power of crystallizing the change we're trying to make and catalyzing a team or a group of people around that particular change. O is for outcomes, so defining the component parts that make up the change you seek. When we get to outcomes, it's going to feel a lot like meeting outcomes. So we're applying that same outcome-based thinking, but now we're doing it in the context of a problem that's not bounded by time and space in a meeting, but still thinking about what are all the things that need to be in place in order to create the change that we seek. P is for plan, so identifying the action steps that will bring about your intended outcomes. This territory is super familiar. This is where we tend to spend most of our organizational lives, which are in tactics and planning. We're not going to spend today a significant amount of time on plan, but we'll introduce some key points around plan or the P part of the scope method when we come back together talking about stakeholders. And then E is for engage, is identifying what we need from other stakeholders and how to involve them. And this is really where, this is our involve module, where we're looking at who are our relevant stakeholders and what are all of the ways that we can include them in our change effort. Next slide. So when do you know that you need to scope something? Typically when you don't know what to do first, but you want or need to do something. So it starts with uncertainty, and from there you're ready to begin to scope a problem. Next slide. Any thoughts or questions before we move forward? Okay. All right, hearing none. So we are moving into the situation. So this is the S in our scope process. It is often the place where that gets short shrift in a change effort. So we're less likely to spend time really fully fleshing out and understanding the situation. And that tends to cause us challenges down the line in terms of implementing strategic and sustainable change. Next slide. So one of the metaphors that we use and that Joanne particularly likes to use in teaching about scope is the blind men or the blind people and the elephant. So in the parable of the blind men and the elephant, there's a group of blind men who've they've come across an elephant, but they've never seen an elephant before. And they are learning and conceptualizing about the elephant by touching it. And each blind person is feeling a different part of the elephant's body, but only one part, such as the side of the elephant or the tusk or the trunk of the elephant. Then they describe the elephant based on their limited experience, and their descriptions of the elephant are then very different from each other. Why, you know, one person's describing a tusk, one person's describing an ear, and they each think that they're right. And in some versions of the parable, the blind people come to blows with each other, and they see the other person as dishonest because they're not seeing the situation from the same perspective that they are. So the parable of the blind men and the elephant has come to really represent that as humans, we have a tendency to claim absolute truth based on our limited and our subjective experience, and therefore we're ignoring the perspective of somebody else. So we talk about the blind men and the elephant in terms of remembering that we're each only seeing the elephant from our perspective. And that particularly in this phase of problem solving, it's incredibly important to gather perspectives from other people, and particularly perspectives of relevant stakeholders. And remembering that each of us holds a piece of the truth, and that it's when we combine those perspectives together that we're fully seeing the whole situation. Next slide. So what are the skills that we need to understand the situation, or why do we need to understand the situation? So again, we start from the perspective of self. So if you're in the midst of a problem solving effort and things feel jumbled up in your head, right, this is often the signal that we need to flesh out our own understanding first. Maybe we're not able to see the whole picture, and often we're not. Like I really believe that we're very rarely are we as one person able to see the whole picture. Maybe we're feeling like we can't pull out the major themes, issues, or patterns, and we may not know the best place to begin. Cody, you and I were on the phone a few weeks ago, and you were talking about something with Blue Sky and mentioning that it felt like a tangled up ball of yarn in your mind, and then we started scoping that particular problem. That's what it can feel like when you are trying to understand the perspective from the situation of self. Next slide. So then why do we also need to understand the situation from the perspective of others? It gets more complicated, right? When we're solving problems and now we're involving more people and their assumptions that they're bringing into the situation. We have uncertainties about their perspectives. So if it's muddled for one person, then we're now solving a problem with everybody else. It's likely jumbled up in their head as well. We want to be really, really aware that each of us holds a different perspective. And again, the group maybe isn't able to discern the major themes, issues, or patterns. And many people might be walking in believing that they already know what the solution is. But as a group of people, if we can't agree on the situation first, it's unlikely or even impossible that we'll ever align around a solution. So we have to take the time to really get clear and make sure we have a shared and complete understanding of the situation first before we jump to solutions. Next slide. So when we're taking the time to understand the situation from the perspective of self, and now we're doing that with others, then the question is, okay, so what's sufficient? How do I know when I have enough perspectives? And I appreciate, Cody and Suzanne, that you both like to get other people's perspectives. I know you put that as sort of a problem in your self column. I think that's wisdom, actually. So how do we know, though, when we have sufficient clarity on the situation? We want to get clear on the relevant historical context, right? We don't need like pages and pages of history, but we do want to pull forward anything that is likely relevant from the history of this particular problem. We want to make sure that we have clarity on the current state. And then we're looking for clarity around all the other considerations surrounding that particular situation. Sometimes the other stuff can feel like noise, but we want to pull in what feels relevant to make sure that we now have a complete understanding. So we're beginning to build a view of the situation that is reflective of, when we do that, of self, other, and system. And it's at that point that we feel that we have a full and complete understanding of the situation, and we can move forward into the next stage of problem scoping. Next slide. So I'm going to pause and see if there are thoughts or questions at this point. I'm trying to pull you guys back over where I can see you.
Looks like they're good.
Not letting me do that. Okay.
A lot of note taking and smiling, so I think you hit a nerve there, Shannon.
Okay. All right. Good. I cannot get you guys to come up over on my other screen. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So Joanne, with that, we are at our 12:45 slot, and we're moving on to Scope How Part 1.
Yeah. So you've heard a lot about theory and a lot of table setting, and so of course, we want to solve real problems. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a quick lap around a real world problem, just to kind of give you a little taste for how this methodology works. So Shannon and I are going to do a little role play, and we like calling this the cooking show demo, which is essentially we're going to take a real situation that we actually scoped out and sort of distill it down to just a couple of minutes, like we roasted a turkey in 20 minutes. This was a real situation that we actually scoped out because it used to be just something that was a made up example, and then Shannon's like, no, wait, that's like really me. So please enjoy our demo. So what we're going to do is we are going to just first by talking about the presenting problem. So the presenting problem is often really helpful. I don't know what happened to my script. There it is. Because what it does is it gives us the starting point to start pulling on that ball of yarn, and it's awesome, often the most pressing salient symptom. So Shan, we're calling this HANGRY, so to get a little table setting there. What's going on with you that we think that there's a problem to be solved?
Yeah, so I've been sitting at my desk all day, and I started early, and I didn't make it a priority to care for myself and eat throughout the day.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, because she's already jumped into the situation, I'm just going to throw that on the piece of paper as these are the things that is going on with her. So we're going to take that, and we're going to just take one of these symptoms and just turn that into our presenting problem. So what's our presenting problem going to be?
I think the presenting problem feels something like, I never have time to eat lunch.
Never have time to eat lunch. Okay. Because you started early and now you're cranking away and other things have gotten priority over you having time to eat lunch. So why is that a problem? Why is this an urgent issue? Why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, well, I get really hungry, and then when that happens, I end up getting brain fog, and then it's a struggle for me to get my work done. And then I find myself standing in the kitchen eating chips and salsa when I'm supposed to be cooking dinner for my family. And it feels really yucky. It doesn't feel like a healthy way to be.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, again, just throw it on the table. And in this phase of the process, what we're really just trying to do is just trying to just get the stuff out of her head and just like, just get it onto paper. Because just by doing that alone, oftentimes you will feel better. So you get brain fog and then you're eating chips, and I can even see you doing that in your kitchen, Shan, because I've been in your kitchen. So of all these things, like what else is going on? What's top of mind for you when you're kind of unpacking this situation?
Yeah. Well, my husband tells me that it's a perpetual problem. So he's really good at eating 3 times a day. He's super structured. I don't know how he does it. And so he likes to eat dinner, right? He likes it as a family that we eat dinner on time and together. And then he gets frustrated that I'm hangry and I haven't done a good routine. I don't have a good routine for preparing dinner.
So this is a really good example, you guys, of the thing that third bucket that Shannon was talking about, just like all the other things that are kind of part of associated with the problem. So how this impacts or her husband's non-helpful editorial comments about this situation. So what else is, it's just to finish off this brain dump, what else is going on about this that makes it kind of icky?
Well, it negatively impacts my family. So I feel like my inability to get my work done it spills over into my family time. And I feel like I'm a bad model for my kids.
Okay, great. All right. So this essentially concludes, this is going to be just the first phase of our brain dump. And I've got a little disoriented. Shan, do we sort now, or do we go back and we sort later?
We can sort.
You sort? Okay. So here's the brain dump. And then the next thing that happens as part of the magic of this method is, because we have the framework of self, other, and system, what I'm going to do is I'm going to magically sort out so essentially everything that she's just said, I'm just going to simply sort it into the buckets of self, other, and system. Because what it's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to begin to identify the themes a little bit more clearly. So I'm going to take all the I phrases that had to do with self, and then I'm going to create another bucket just simply called other. And this one, just all the stuff that she was talking about her husband. And then finally, our last bucket is system. So system is all the things like just sort of surrounding the actual problem itself. So the family system and all this stuff. So anything having to do with kids and family is going to go into this bucket. Voila. Okay. So from this, then we are actually able to begin to see some patterns emerging. And so at this point, I'm going to just pause the demo because we're going to pick this back up in a second and just see if anybody has any questions or comments about just how you've observed this. Any thoughts? Some random thought. I'm curious how this lands with you guys.
Maybe not so much like a thought on this, but I think what would be helpful if you guys have some just like maybe like 4 prompt questions to kind of pull out because I feel like getting what's happening to me is going to be easy, what might be happening to others, but getting the situation identified of like the system, if there's any prompts to answer these questions, that'd be nice.
Well, you notice that the conversation that we had was fairly generic, right? So I was like, hey, Shan, what's going on? Why are you even talking about it? So I ask a lot of why questions, like, why is that an issue? And then I might ask a what question, like, what else is going on, right? So essentially, these are best practices in ethnography. Any sort of empathy interview. Anybody have any design thinking training? Nobody has any design thinking training? Okay. So this is essentially a critical step in any design thinking process, is essentially called ethnography. So we've actually given you some prompts, I think, in the worksheet. Yes? There'll be some prompts.
Yeah.
So essentially it's what and why, tell me more, what else is going on? And then you're listening deeply, right? And if you get curious about something, and you'll experience this when we get into our small groups, like somebody will say something and then you're like, ooh, that sounds like there's something more, like your intuition is like, oh, I want to unpack that, right? Then you might ask a follow-up question about it. Does that help, Cody? Right.
And then if we go to the next slide, Joanne, I mean, this is also, we've sorted it. So now if we want to model the what else, right?
Oh yeah, thank you. So then now that we have the self-other system, the next thing that I'm going to do in the process is I'm going to say, so Shannon, taking a look at what we've already sorted, now that you're looking at the themes, what else is missing? So what else is missing from this, Shan?
Mm-hmm. Well, it feels like maybe something that's missing is that I get a lot of validation from my work, and I feel like it's important for me. Like I feel like managing my time well is something that's important to me. And so like part of what's connected to that is that I feel like I can be a good mom and I can be really good at my job, and that the fact that I can do both makes me feel good about who I am. And so when this happens, it kind of erodes my general sense of being kick-ass.
So what's interesting about this, what she just said, is that now we're kind of getting at like it's not about lunch, right? There's something sort of her identity, and there's some deep stuff that's starting to emerge from just me saying, hey, what's missing, right? And I didn't do any magic. I just said, what's missing? And she just offered up that context. And what you'll discover is that this happens all the time. You just hold the space. You go, tell me more. And people will just tell all sorts of things. What else is missing? What else is going on?
Yeah, the other thing that happens is that because the kids are hungry, they start snacking, and then like they're grabbing a granola bar out of the pantry at 5 or 6 o'clock, and then we do make dinner, and then we sit down to eat, and they don't want to eat because they've totally had snacks, and now I'm crankier because I'm hungry and I have kids who don't want to eat dinner that I've made.
Awesome, great. Copy and pasted the wrong thing. So. And thank goodness for the screen share, you guys can actually see that so I'll make this a little bit smaller. Great. Anything else?
I think that's it. That was complete.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to pause the demo and then we're going to continue on with what happens next. So let me get myself reoriented here. So I'm going to talk, now we're moving into the 12:55 section. We're a little bit behind time, but I think I'm able to make up some time. So I want to talk about how we move from the brain dump to change. And before I do that, I need to sort of describe to you sort of how we think about the situation in a way that sort of intuitively makes sense to be able to point us in the direction to how we find the change that we actually seek to make. And the way I want to do that is I want to introduce this metaphor of a tree. So everything that that Shannon had talked about are symptoms of a problem. You can think about these symptoms as being like the leaves and branches of the tree. Like they're plentiful, there's a lot of them, right? And they're all over the place. She's hungry, she can't eat, she's stressed, husband's calendar, she's a terrible person, and and so there's all this stuff, right? So this is always the point where like, what do I do? What do I do first? In organizations, because you haven't spent enough time fleshing out the situation, like we already in 5 minutes understand more about Shannon's problem than we would have in a typical problem solving effort. It's like, well, just keep a snack by your desk. What's the problem, right? That change at the level of the surface level problem is often where organizations will try to slap a change on. This is often called a Band-Aid problem. And as ridiculous as this Band-Aid looks on a tree, that's often what happens in organizations, right? Not going to solve the problem. There are historical antecedents that we cannot also address in this situation. Probably lots of stuff about Shannon's upbringing and her childhood that have caused her to be this hard charging, impactful, powerful woman, but has resulted in her eating lunch, right? So we can't address a lot of those issues either. And we call those deep root cause problems. Every problem has something deep in the soil that is historical or cultural, and we just can't, it's beyond our scope and ability to impact change at that level. So what do? We have to kind of find that happy medium. What we want to do is implement a change, not at all the branches and leaves level, but closer to the trunk level, or sometimes closer to a root level, right? Because one of the things we know by our intuition of trees, if we can kind of solve at that level, what we can actually do is impact the system, right? We can impact other problems from inversion. So this is the skill that we're going to be talking about doing. Now, how do we do that? First thing, you do this lovely brain dump. Then we take the brain dump, and then we distill it to, we start with a problem statement that at least gets us started. And then we ask three things of this starting problem statement. We ask why, or sorry, what is the change that we see? So that's sort of, a lot of times that's kind of like the draft problem statement. So it gives us a place to start. We know it's not, I always say it's not right. Probably a better way to say it, it's not quite accurate enough, right? It's not quite profound enough. So that's the draft problem statement. Then we ask why. Why is that a problem we're solving? Why is it a problem we're solving is really interesting because it begins to dig at the significance of the problem, right? So we uncovered that a little bit when we were empathy interviewing Shannon, but we're going to get even deeper by asking, why is that a problem? And then my favorite set of questions, these leading questions, is, so what caused this problem? Or sometimes you can ask, how did we get here? And what that begins to do is that begins to draw our attention down closer to the roots of the tree so that we can really begin to uncover, like, what is the source of this problem? Because if we get close to that, then we can really address a change that is sustainable and impactful, right? Can impact the whole system. So far, so good? Following? Okay. So how do we do this? So our presenting problem is, I never have time to eat lunch. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at our statement, our situation, and draft a problem statement. Then we're going to ask, and I'm just going to ask the same darn question over and over and over again. Why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? And why is that a problem? You might feel like it's a broken record, but what it does is it forces, it's fascinating to do this. And Cody, you remember the first time we did this. It forced you to really get viscerally connected to why this is really an important problem to solve. And as important it is, and so that's the reason why a Band-Aid solution is not going to be satisfying, right? So it begins to draw your attention and increase your willingness to solve it in the right way. This is also really important when you're doing this in groups, right? So get at that managing expectations and all that other assumption stuff. So we're going to talk about that a bit. And then you ask, then you go back to your draft problem statement, then you ask a different series of questions, which is, how do we get here? How do we get here? And again, you're going to ask that again and again and again until you get to something like, something happened when I was 5 years old, and that's how I ended up being, right? Because we know we can't solve it, that problem, but that's when we stop asking this problem. And then we are able to kind of, based upon that, come up with our true change statement, our true problem statement, and magic happens and life is good. Any questions about that before we go back to the demo? So far, still tracking? Okay. Where are we in time and space? Okay, hey, look at that. You're back on time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna complete the demo and get us through change. And then I think we're gonna go ahead and we're just gonna go spit out some outcomes just to kind of give you a sense of like where this ends up. And then that'll be the end of the demo. All right, so here we go. So we did situation. Now we're gonna move into change. And I'm gonna say, so our presenting problem again was, just go ahead and copy and paste. I never have time to eat lunch. And based upon all this lovely context that we generated, Shannon, can you just give us a draft problem statement just to throw a dart on the wall to get us started? Oh, you're muted, you're muted, you're muted.
I had noisy children for a minute. I feel something like I don't know how to give myself a break to eat lunch.
Okay. Don't know how to give myself a break to eat lunch. Great. So this is the what. So we know it had something to do with break, and we know it has something to do with lunch. So that's the first. We've answered the what. What are we trying to do? Mm-hmm. Now we're going to explore a little bit of why. So, Shannon, why is this a problem worth solving?
It is a problem worth solving because it impacts my health and well-being and work and my family.
Okay. And why is that a problem worth solving if it impacts your health and well-being and work and your family?
That is a problem because really those are the things I care about most in the world.
They are the fundamental values that you carry with you. And if you're not able to care about the fundamental values of the things that you care about in the world, why is that a problem?
Because if I don't tend to them, my life will fall apart and I'll be miserable.
So at this point in the process, we know it's sufficient. We don't have to ask any more questions, right? So this is often, we used to joke, you're gonna die in a van by the river all alone. All right. This is the catastrophic end. And for organizations, if you can't articulate not solving this problem to some catastrophic end, we're gonna go out of business, we're not going to be able to pay salaries. We're going to have to fire people. Usually, especially in groups, it becomes clarifying, like, oh yeah, we've really got to solve this problem. Now, sometimes you get to this and you kind of go, oh well, it's not a problem. Which in that case, you can go on with your life, right? It identifies that this is not a problem worth solving. You just don't want to spend the resources to solve it, which is really important for a team to know too, because a lot of times we're solving problems that we shouldn't be solving, right? So it begins to clarify why it's a problem worth solving, literally. All right, so now that we know that, we're gonna go back to our draft problem statement. I don't know how to give myself a break to eat lunch. And I'm gonna ask Shannon a very simple question. How did we get here? What caused that problem?
What caused the problem that I don't know how to give myself a break to eat lunch is that I'm a perpetual overscheduler.
Aha, too much stuff on your plate. Perhaps a common observation of some of the rest of us in this room. And so I'm curious, Shan, how did we get here? What caused that problem?
What caused the problem of me being a perpetual overscheduler is that I like having a lot of commitments.
Oh, so you do this to yourself. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you like having a lot of commitments. And I'm curious, and so this is where you might ask the question, you go, I don't know what she's going to say, right? Because it's a weird question to go, and how did we get here? But I'm going to ask you anyways and see what you say. What caused that situation, or what caused that problem? How did we get here?
Yeah, what caused the problem, or how we got to me liking having a lot of commitments, is that it makes me feel the most validated when I'm busy.
Okay. Thank you, Shan. So we have begun to really uncover some, this is how Shannon is wired psychologically, right? This is everything about her entire being. So we've gone from snacking, hangry to psychological identification. So at this point, we can probably stop as well, because we don't want to solve at that level. We love Shannon just the way she is, right? we want to solve the problem with lunch. Well, now we understand a little bit, so you can almost see the roots, right, of the problem unfolding. And so now we have a little bit more clarity of sort of the nature of the problem. Now we can really kind of get at the change statement. Okay, so this is where a little magic happens. So you're gonna have to hang with me. So what I say to Shannon is, okay, read over everything that we've generated, sort of sit with it, and tell me, based upon what we now can see, what we've surfaced, what do you think is the real problem we're trying to solve?
I think the real problem is that I don't balance the fulfillment I get from being busy with self-care.
That's really interesting. I'm going to stick this in the next slide. Here. I want to go back for a second. I want you guys, will you say that again?
Yep, I don't balance the fulfillment I get from being busy with self-care.
Okay. And the way we know that is because she's, what are you paying attention to? Like, there are things that are jumping out at you, right? So there's like, you like being busy, right? You like, this is how you get validated. You like having lots of commitments, right? So this is sort of an interesting like root that is coming out. But then there's this whole like self-care and well-being. So what she's done is she's combined elements of, well, why is that a problem and what's going on, to really develop an increased and clarifying understanding of what she's really trying to do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to have you guys take a look at the evolution of the. All right. So we went from the presenting problem, which is leaves and branches, I don't have time to eat lunch, to a draft problem statement, which is, oh, because I'm doing this to myself. I don't know how to give myself a break. To, I don't know how to balance fulfillment I get from being busy with self-care. That's a profound shift from give myself a break to eat lunch to, oh, this is a deeper problem, right? This is about life balance, work-life balance. So once we have the problem statement, that's a very powerful moment for a group or for your existence. Sometimes it is energizing to think about situations in the negative. Sometimes it's more energizing to flip it in its forward-facing version. So all we're going to do is hold up a mirror to the problem statement. I don't know how to, or don't balance the fulfillment I get from being busy with self-care. And we're just going to state it in the positive. And therefore, Shannon, why don't you read the intent?
To balance the fulfillment I get from being busy with self-care.
Okay. So you guys see how all of a sudden it feels, and it also should sound very familiar. This is like our meeting intents, right? Our intention is to balance fulfillment we get from being busy with self-care. That is our North Star. That's where we're going. Now, with the magic of the cooking show, tell me all the things that have to be in place in order for us to prove to ourselves that we have accomplished our intent.
Number one, increase clarity. So this is for self, that eating lunch supports my ability to do excellent work and be a good mom and wife. Number two, daily prioritization of work that includes a sacred time for eating lunch. Number three, a guide or process to help me know when to say yes or no to new commitments. And I think having a lunch buddy might also help.
Great, thanks. So this is very short. I mean, you probably kind of, how did you guys figure it out? We did end up getting there. It didn't take us 2 seconds, but so that's the end of this cooking show. I want to just pause here and see reflections, comments, thoughts. Suzanne's clapping.
What are you clapping for, Suzanne? What words would you add to that?
And well, I mean, it's nice because I have this problem too, so I appreciate y'all going through this. It was a great demo.
Mm-hmm. See, and we solved Suzanne's leaves and branches as well. That's the other thing about making this explicit. Anything, Suzanne? Any other thoughts? I love this example, by the way. This is it was been fun to develop this with Shan.
it's nice to just like organize it all and be like, okay, what's controllable? And then also to see that like you're not putting a Band-Aid on a symptom. Like, let's really get a little deeper and then to solve more problems or avoid more symptoms down the road.
Right. Right. So a Band-Aid solution could have been, she calls up her friend Joanne, and Joanne goes, just get some Kind bars, stick them next to your desk. Like,
Yeah.
and then she's going to be cranky because she isn't getting up to do yoga, and she's not, you know, she's still feeling like a shitty mom because now she's eating Kind bars at her desk. Right. So it's not solving the problem. It's just putting a Kind bar Band-Aid over the
Band-Aid, yeah.
full Kind bar Band-Aid. All right. So that was another lap through this cycle. Okay, so guess what? You guys get to practice. But first, we're going to take a break.
First, we're going to have a little self-care. Speaking of self-care.
So come back as close to the 2:30 as we can.
Perfect.